Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads. This is our monthly tier list, and we decided to do a little bit of a two-parter here. We were going to do animated characters. That's what we mentioned on the live stream the other day. We're going to split it in two parts and do Rebels and Clone Wars, tie into Ahsoka. We're going to start with Rebels characters here. Make sure you're hitting that like button. We do a tier list every single month, so if you would like to see those tier lists, make sure you're subscribed. And we actually have a lot of participatory perks in our Patreon and YouTube memberships that involve tier lists. So if you would like to be part of the tier list program with us and you enjoy these videos, make sure you check out those tiers. You might find one that's in your price range. Let's get into it. And I guess it's kind of a random order. I didn't order it this time. Usually I have it a very specific order. So we're starting with Grand Admiral Thrawn. This one is really tough because he's an S tier character most of the time. When it comes to Rebels, I think he probably is the singular best villain that carries through the entire show. I don't know if I could give him S tier in a Rebels context. I feel like it's A, but if you say S, I'm completely on board to give him S.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much in limbo as well because I really do like him. He's got some cool things that are new too, like his physicality, the way he explores art is a little different than it was in Legends, and I really like that. But yeah, it's tough because he's only really like a two-season villain, and I could go with like bottom of S, but if we
Yeah.
want to, I will stick with top
Yeah,
of
I
A.
do feel like he
Yeah.
is the best villain in the show. He's the only one that really has a
Yeah.
multi-season impact on the show, and he is in there in the finale, and then it carries on to Ahsoka.
All right, next up we have the Ghost Crew's fearless leader, Hera Syndulla in Star Wars Rebels. I think she's great. She does sometimes take a little bit of a backseat for some of the stories that are more Jedi focused, Mandalorian focused. But I think when she does have her moments, she does really capitalize. I really love the Rylath arc. I will give her an A. I just think we needed maybe like another arc or two for her to really be like an S tier for me.
Yeah, Hera's another really tough one for me because, like you mentioned, she does take a back seat mostly in the show. There aren't too many episodes that are completely dedicated to Hera. A lot of Hera plays off of other characters and Kanan, and she keeps the group all together. I think amongst the Star Wars characters here, she's close to S. I'll agree and say let's put her in A for now. Next is Bo-Katan Kryze. She does have pretty strong arcs and moments here throughout the show. The Mandalorian stuff in Rebels is very underrated and actually a really strong piece of the show's arc all the way through. I would say she's an A tier. I don't think she's close to an S, but her moments in the show are really strong in some of the more memorable parts, especially of season 4.
I really like the portrayal that was brought into the story, especially building off of a lot of the stuff that Sabine was already dealing with. Here, a little bit more grizzled, like still trying to keep things together, even though she doesn't, have this plan under her control. She feels like a little bit more of a true Mandalorian warrior. I would put her A. I just think she's more lower A versus where Hera is like pushing for an S. Next up, we have our favorite Lasat and Zeb Orrelios, or Zeb for short. He is the comedic relief of the group, but he only really has like an arc or two to himself. It is very much tied to stuff that is off screen before Rebels. So I would put him a B.
I was gonna say A for Zeb. I think the Ghost Crew in general, they're a strong dynamic. He and Chopper definitely are like the ones with the least development. The camaraderie he brings, even though he is kind of the brute of the show, the moments he has with Kallus, the progressing of that relationship. I think he's a pretty strong character. I was gonna say A.
Yeah, no, I'm willing to put him up there.
Next is Chopper. I do think he brings a dynamic that is very much so perfect for what Rebels is as a show. As a droid specifically, he's so different from what we're used to. Still not a massive fan of the Chopper only episodes, but I would still say Chopper's an A tier for me.
See, I would firmly put him in the B tier because you don't really get to understand him. I know he's influential, he brings Fulcrum at the end of season 1 finale. Like, he does really cool things. I love him rolling around on his like front wheel only, wailing with his two arms with a blaster on each. He is my favorite Star Wars war criminal. He gives a great perspective on what droids can be when they have their personality kind of go haywire. I personally would put him as like a top would be.
I can compromise on that since you gave me Zeb.
Next, we have former Imperial turned loyal rebel Alexander Kallus. I really do like him. I just feel like sometimes he gets a little shortchanged by the time season 4 comes around. I like him enough to put him as an A.
I was going to say A as well. I think behind Hera and above Zeb, he does have one of the best arcs of the entire show. Next is the Grand Inquisitor. He does leave a big mark for one season, and he has appeared in a lot of other Star Wars material because of the mark he leaves. The Utapau design is really, really cool. And then also, of course, the first person we get to see who's using the spinning lightsaber blade as well. I hate to say it because we've done so many, but I think this is another A tier character.
He is in so many ways way more developed, way more just rich than the Ghost Crew is as a whole in that first season. Frankly, I think he is one of the most impactful Star Wars characters in animation history. I really loved his design, his look. I honestly would push for him as a bottom of S, but because of his limitations in screen time, top of A works for me too.
Yeah, I don't think I could quite say he's S. For me, I would say he's behind Kallus and Hera.
Next up, we have the enigmatic force being known as the Bendu. He has some really fascinating moments, and he also has like a little bit of hubris, which I thought was really cool to see. I would put him in A.
I agree. I think Bendu is one of the most interesting concepts Rebels has made. One of the highlights of season 3 for sure. Next is As Morgan. This character kind of typifies the Disney XD side of Rebels. He's not horrible, but I think in the case of Rebels, I would say F tier.
Early season Rebels where they're a little sillier about the whole thing. Yeah, easy F tier. Commander Wolf is an interesting character study for me, especially because he is traumatized. He is scarred. Once he gets his heart and his mind on the right track again, he is good. He just doesn't have a lot more development past that. But he's not really that big for me. I think he's fine. I would honestly say top of C or bottom of B.
I was going to say C tier for Wolf. He's really just not important enough in Rebels. I think across the board, he's always really kind of been a B tier-ish clone across this whole story. So I think for Rebels, where he's not nearly as impactful as he is in Clone Wars, and where he is the least impactful of the 3 clones we get, I would say C tier. Next is Sabine, and Sabine, I think, is one of the best characters in Star Wars Rebels. Not only are we getting her story continued because her character is so strong in the show, but like Ezra, she continues to grow and develop and change throughout the entire thing. Season 3 really is Sabine's season, and you get so much development with her that by the time you get to the finale of Rebels, ending it with her and Ahsoka just does kind of feel right. I would put her at the top of the S tier right now.
I agree. Top of S tier for me. She is wonderful. The Mandalorian continuations from what Lucas and Filoni had developed in the Clone Wars. It's great to see the payoff, especially now that we have Clone Wars season 7. The idea that her legacy that we know so far in the New Republic era, and whenever she eventually perishes, is that she's like this wandering a famous Mandalorian artist is very cool to me. Top of S tier, easily. Next up, we have Commander Jin Sato. Pretty interesting character. He is the first real like military figure that the Ghost Crew really works with and allies themselves with. I would put him in bottom of B.
I would say B tier as well. It is nice to have some weight to the character by having him die. All right, next is Ulrich Wren, the father of Sabine. Ulrich is an artist, not a warrior, and I always did like the relationship with Ulrich and Sabine you get. There's something kind of special there because of how much she clashes with her mom. He is focused on a lot less than her mother, and I think overall makes less of an impact, in my opinion. I would say C tier for Ulrich Wren.
I really like that once we finally got to rescue him in Rebels, we find out that he is the artist, but he doesn't really get much more past that. I would say C, and I'd say ahead of Wolf. Next up, we have AP5. He has like a pretty interesting start, honestly. Like his usefulness to the rebellion is apparent. The scene where he's in space and he sees the butterflies and starts singing, it should not have worked, but for me, it really did. So I would say C tier.
This is going to surprise people, but I would say B tier for AP5. I've always liked AP5. I don't like the placement of his episodes in season 2 specifically, but I think AP5 is a really funny and interesting character, especially when you have Chopper and AP5 as your mirror of C3PO and R2D2.
Yeah, why not? Let's put him there.
Okay, sounds good. Then let's move on to Cham Syndulla. Cham is a really strong character throughout all of his appearance in Star Wars, and he does have really good moments here in Rebels. However, I would say when I think about Cham Syndulla, most of the time I do think of his appearances in Clone Wars. I also think of Lords of the Sith and some of his other appearances in extraneous Star Wars material. I'd say probably still C tier though. He might be a B or an A in a Clone Wars list, but I think in Rebels he's not quite as impactful in my opinion.
I would agree with C. I really do like him. The interpersonal dynamics that he has with Hera is what it's really rich about that. Yeah, I would say top of C. Next up, we have General Jan Dodonna, famous from A New Hope, sitting around the table. But here, he gets a couple moments. I don't think it's anything significant though. Like I would put him in D. I just wanted to see like some real character out of him, and we never really get development for him.
Yeah, it's tough for those types of characters that don't really get anything in the show because he doesn't do anything bad, but he doesn't really stand out. I think Sato is a character who stands out much more from the rebellion like administrative side. I'm okay with D. All right, next is Eighth Brother. We never see Eighth Brother's face. I would say D, probably even under Dodonna.
Yeah, I would say bottom of D. I still think he has coolness to him, so I'd put him there, but I can definitely see him being dropped to an F sooner or later. Next up, we have one of my favorite Mandalorians ever, and that's Fen Rao. Fen Rao is just so cool. Protectors of Concord Dawn, the system itself being so cool. He is the catalyst for a lot of the real Mandalorian storytelling. Fantastic character. I love his second armor too, especially. That's just a great look for him. I would say A.
I would say A as well. I was going to say behind Bindu, but absolutely, I think he's a great character and one of those characters that really leaves an impact on you when you watch the Mandalorian side of this story. We have Cassius Constantine. Constantine is one of the more frequent Imperial goons you see throughout the entire show. Now, Constantine is more competent than a lot of the Imperials that we see who have their hats really low that they kind of don't want to animate their eyes. But I don't know if I'd say he's a great character. I'd probably say D tier for Constantine.
Yeah, I almost want to put him at C tier because we see him so often. But I guess his ultimate legacy is failing to heed the advice of both Tarkin and Thrawn. For the most part, he's a D, but honestly, he might be top of D. Next up, we have the fifth brother. In Rebels, he's just pure brute. He also does die. The first one of the Inquisitors at Malachor. I would say C tier.
Yeah, I'd say C tier as well. Maybe right behind Ulrich Wren. I think he's a memorable character for sure, but he doesn't have anything really to him. He is the brute of the Inquisitors, and Seventh Sister is a lot more interesting. Next, we have Gar Saxon. Gar Saxon is the main Mandalorian villain for the Empire. He is an Imperial hand as well. Gar Saxon has a lot of really cool, memorable moments in Rebels, particularly. I think Rebels does a good job of bringing forth that potential that you see in something like Darth Maul, Son of Dathomir, and then when we get it in season 7 of Clone Wars. I'd say B tier.
He benefits from being introduced and being connected to the other characters. I'd put him as a B. I almost want to put him behind Jun Sato. Next up, we have Goody Perez from the Iron Squadron, one of the most disliked episodes of Rebels. Again, just a classic Disney XD character. I would put her as an F tier. I just don't care.
Yeah, I would agree. She's not memorable at all. I believe she's only in the one episode. Next is Gregor. Gregor, who has a completely different personality than we see in Clone Wars. I would say Gregor is a solid B character for me. His death at the end of the show is sad and it pulls on your heartstrings.
I think that's a good spot as well. He just feels like the only clone that actually tried to relax in retirement. So I did appreciate that. So next up is my favorite character, former Captain Hondo Ohnaka at this point. In Rebels, he's really down on his luck. Like he already had a lot of infighting with his crews. He's like your 70-year-old uncle that's like trying to be like hip with the kids. That's kind of his whole energy. As he is in Rebels, he feels kind of C tier. He is in one of the more side mission heavy arcs for sure.
I can't go C tier for Hondo really ever. Hondo is always hilarious. Like I laugh every time I watch one of his episodes, even when they're just with him and the Ugnaughts running around. Hondo is perfect comedic relief. I agree, he's not used in Rebels nearly to his potential. He is mostly part of side missions, but I do think he's a B tier nonetheless. Next is Jai Kell. Jai actually has a relatively big role when it comes to side characters in Rebels. He's not that memorable when it comes to like Ezra's buddies in the show or the people Ezra makes friends with. I'd say C tier.
Yeah, I mean, he only really has like what 2 or 3 appearances, and they're pretty far apart from season 1 to season 4. Next, we have Kitsune, one of the weaker storylines and characters I felt always. I'd put her as like a D tier character.
I'm fine with D tier. She is one of those characters that like she shows up when they do those episodes in season 2 where they're like each episode tells the backstory a little bit of one of the main characters. She's supposed to give a little bit of insight into Sabine's more shady past. Next is Maketh Tua. She is mostly in the beginning of this show. Not that memorable of a character either. I'm fine with D or F.
She feels like someone who's very stiff, and I think her clothing reflects that. She thinks she's doing great things, but she's underperforming in every metric possible. She's got one of the most horrifying deaths in Rebels for sure. It's like it's shocking that she's a relatively normal person just trying to do her job, and then she's killed off like that. Next up, we have an immediate S tier, Kanan Jarrus. I just want to appreciate that Rebels had a Jedi who never finished his training, but also isn't ultimately the strongest character either. Like he doesn't have that much of the Force. He is very limited. He has vices. He these are things that he's trying to push away until Ezra kind of comes into his life, and the way he kind of comes back as a character is so rich and satisfying to see.
Completely agree. The best character in Star Wars Rebels, and I think it's by a long shot. Kanan's journey throughout the show is one of my favorites. I always gravitate towards kind of the master, the teacher type characters. That's one of the reasons why Obi-Wan is one of my favorites. But I like watching the burdens that these types of characters carry and the way they overcome them. I don't know if we see any character overcome more in this show than Kanan. Next is Mart Matten. Mart Matten is part of the Iron Squadron arc, but then becomes something a bit more, one of the more memorable characters, and does actually contribute to the rebellion more so than a lot of the side characters we pick up along the way. C tier for me. I don't think this character gets into B.
Yeah, he's a character. If we just had his Iron Squadron appearance and that was it, I probably would have hated his guts enough to be calling it like an F tier. But yeah, once he becomes like an X-wing pilot, participates in the Battle of Lothal and everything, kind of lives up to his uncle's name, trying to like do good. Next up is an incredible character, but no longer Darth, just Maul. He's like a father of lies. He's such an interesting manipulator. Just he's got such a satisfying death too. He really justified his place in Rebels for me. I really liked him as probably the second most important villain in the show, right? A very personal villain compared to Thrawn. Though, I don't know if he had enough time for me to like really stew in there.
Yeah, he's an S tier Star Wars character, but in Rebels, I don't think he has enough to quite reach S tier. I would say A, purely for his death alone. It is a wonderful, amazing, incredible, one of my favorite scenes in all of Star Wars. And on top of that, the Malachor stuff is great. The way, I mean, he blinds Kanan. Okay, next is Melch. Melch is one of the Ugnaughts who's friends with as Morgan and Hondo. Melch leads to one of the funnier scenes in Rebels, honestly. Other than that, I never really remember Melch other than Hondo running around going, Melch, Melch. D tier.
Yeah, he is an F tier character for me, but the death alone makes him D tier. Next up, we have Mon Mothma, and before Andor, this was really the biggest impact that Mon Mothma had as a character. I feel like this characterization will only get better after some of the more interesting tidbits that we've been seeing about her relationship with what Tarkin has done and all this. I want to give it like a top of B because I just don't think we had enough of her.
Yeah, I would agree. She's wonderful in every single moment we get of her. I wish there was a little bit more, but like you said, this was our peak Mon Mothma storytelling in canon until we got Andor. All right, well, here is Governor Arinda Pryce. Arinda Pryce is a character that is really hard for me to separate from the Thrawn novel because she's really good in the Thrawn novel. She's a great villain and actually one of the more surprisingly strong Imperial characters. Does she do some dumb things once in a while? Yes. All Imperials always end up doing so. but for the most part, she holds her own against characters like Tarkin and Thrawn. I'd put her at the top of B as well.
Yeah, I would say that's a great spot for her. By the end, she becomes like the survivor of the village. She is able to strike and kill Kanan, right? Like she is vicious. And I know her rise is vicious, but for people just basing it on the show, it's kind of shocking to see how she kind of doubles down and comes back stronger. Next, we have Corey, our B Wing engineer. Very minor character, but he made the B Wing so cool. Yeah, I love his connection with Hera, even if it's not really that important. So yeah, I would say somewhere in B. I'm not really sure.
Bottom of B. He's a fun character, a memorable character, especially when it comes to the smaller role side characters in this show. The B Wing is one of the peak designs of any Star Wars ship. I've always loved the B Wing. I had the B Wing toy as a kid. Next is Rook, who is not as big of a character in this show as he is in the Thrawn trilogy, but in a way, he's a bit more menacing. He does have a lot more moments where he fights and we get to like actually see him fight instead of like standing around and guarding Thrawn. I think another B tier character here for Rook.
The fact that like you see him be so small and diminutive, and I've always thought the Nogri as like big, muscly, but kind of shortish, like Wolverine-like characters. But then seeing the agility and then seeing like the bass boosted voice, I was like, oh, okay, I can see how this is terrifying. Like he's like a nightmarish alien-like design to me. So I liked it. Next up, we have our favorite navigator, pilot. I like him. It's silly because he's only got like one real appearance as like a commercial economy class flight to Lothal, basically. It's kind of funny seeing the Ghost Crew have to take like public transportation and he's there. I would put him though as like a bottom of C.
Yeah, he does not much of a character in Rebels, but I do love Star Tours and I love Rex, so definitely got to put him in the upper half of this. Next is Ryder Azadi. Ryder Azadi is a character that brings us a lot of the backstory for Ezra, his parents, Lothal, which we love to explore Lothal in this show. I'd say this is a B tier character as well.
Same place that I was thinking. He is a very early season Rebels character before he makes a triumphant return at the end. Wish we got more of him. He has this grounded perspective. Another S tier character coming here, Ezra Bridger. He is our POV, but I also just love his compassion. That is a really big thing in season 1 and 2.
I would say behind Kanan in front of Sabine, almost by virtue of just being the main character of the show. But Ezra's growth and transformation, especially between season 2 and 3, is pretty incredible. The decisions he makes, how important to the galaxy he is. It's hard to argue that really any other character besides Kanan has a substantial a role enough to to warrant beating out Ezra. He is a really great character and definitely the one who grows and changes throughout the show the most. All right, next is Saw Gerrera. Saw Gerrera doesn't get too much time in Rebels, but the time he does get is pretty good. Maybe not as strong or memorable as his origins in Clone Wars or his appearances and importance, very heavy importance in Bad Batch. C or B tier because he's not in the show much, so I'm okay with the C tier, but I do like his appearances enough to put him in B.
I would say Saw is solidly B. He is one of the more skilled rebel fighters, but he also has been so scarred from the start of his journey. Next, we have the seventh sister, and the nicest part about this is that she's so deliciously evil, and she has a little funny little droid following her around. The more I think about her, though, she does kind of fall in the same trap as the fifth brother. Like she does have far more dialogue, but as time goes on, she felt like diminishing returns for me. I would say I'd be a little nicer than I was with Fifth Brother. I would say bottom of B or top of C.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing because I do think she's a tropey kind of basic villain. She's more memorable than Fifth Brother purely because she does talk a lot more. I'm fine with bottom of B. Next is Grand Moff Tarkin. Grand Moff Tarkin is excellent as always in this show. Does have quite a bit to chew on in the show. I want to give him an A tier just by virtue of it being Grand Moff Tarkin, but I'm okay with top of B-ish right behind Chopper as well.
Yeah, I mean, very impactful. Really ties well with the Tarkin novel. I wish we got to see more of him. He is a very early Rebels character, but that's not to say he wasn't effective. Yeah, I'm fine with having him behind Chopper. Next up, we have Turba. He's fine. He's just another Ugnaught. There's no real value to him, so I would say F tier just to kind of get him out of the way. He doesn't have anything iconic to me.
Sure, I can't put him in the same tier as Milch. Next is Tristan Wren. Tristan is the brother of Sabine. Actually has a pretty strong role in this show. I always liked Tristan's dynamic with Sabine. Again, like usually when we get family dynamics in this show, when you're introducing the entire family for one of our main characters, some of them always feel lacking compared to others. I don't think any of Sabine's family really does. Tristan and her and Sabine have a contentious relationship, but one that I do think actually works. I'd say Tristan's a B tier character.
Near or at the bottom of B. I struggle to really consider him that important because he is Sabine's brother, but once he like is unified with the family, he just loses all narrative interest for me. Yeah, I'd say bottom of B. He has a strong start. Next up, we have the matriarch of the Wren clan, Ursa Wren. Very similar to Sabine, which only makes sense for why they clash heads. After her, the Gar Saxon fight, she has much narrative purpose other than just like being almost killed along with her husband. I would say ahead of Quarry, but behind Gar.
I was going to take her up a little higher in B, but still keep B. I think around the Gregor Ryder Azadi type level. She's not in much, obviously, besides those couple Sabine Mandalore arcs, but of the three Rin clan, she makes the most impact. And I do find the dynamic with her and Sabine to be kind of the crux of the redemption of Sabine and the way she's able to forgive herself. Personally, I would put her maybe right ahead of Gregor.
Sure, that works for me.
Next is Darth Vader. Darth Vader isn't in too much of the show, but his appearances are magnificent. And he makes one of the best scenes, probably the single best moment in all of Rebels for me, is the fight between him and Ahsoka. That moment alone, I would say A tier for Darth Vader. I'm okay putting him at the bottom because he has very little screen time, but what he has is absolutely incredible.
I really do like Vader's appearances. I like the Quarry inspired design, the ferocity, the coldness, the fight. But I think the scene that still sticks out to me is his assault on Sato's ship. That's just peak TIE Fighter X1 fighting. I would put him just behind Fenrir. I think he has a little bit more in the Bo-Katan for me. Next, we have Varys Hayden. I like him. I like his design. I think he's just too weak-willed once he's actually pushed into a difficult situation. I'd say C tier.
I'd say C tier as well. Cool character, cool concept. There's not too much to him in Rebels specifically. Next, we have Rex. Rex is awesome in this show. Maybe not quite as great as he is in Clone Wars, but the moments he does have here make his Clone Wars character even stronger while also giving us perfect callbacks to that show if you were a fan of Clone Wars prior to watching Rebels. Really enhance the character and what he became post Clone Wars. It shows you what the clones could be, and if we do see more clones post Return of the Jedi, I would love to see them be similar to how Rex fought in Rebels. So I'd say an A tier character as well. Probably bottom of A.
Yeah, I like him. I like his introduction. I like his bickering with Kanan. But I mean, I appreciated what we did with him. For him to even come back was cool. For him to be so well adjusted, but then still have these cracks that were important to him. Yeah, definitely cool. So next we have Kikatra Vizago, arms dealer. Gives us the first real glimpse into Zeb's story about how weapons really kill the Lasat people. He's there. I like that he got to come back and have a little bit more of a good guy role. He has charm and personality. Top of B, not a bad place for him.
I would put him in at least C. I think he's a memorable enough character. He does have a lot of charm to him. He's a character that does kind of grow and get a little more redeemed towards the end of the show. He at least deserves bottom of C. I would at least put him above Jai and C.
Sure, I'm down with that.
All right, next is Volt Scarus. Volt Scarus is the leader of the Sky Strike Academy. He also heads the Defender Project and flies the TIE Defender for Thrawn. Just the fact that Thrawn personally picked him to do that is also very, very cool. One of those classic Imperial type characters. I would say at least a B tier. I'd put him somewhere, maybe right behind Hondo, around Hondo in B. He's a really solid character.
Yeah, I'd say behind Saw Gerrera. I think Gerrera still has more impact. Has not much else past that. He's just doing his job. It's unfortunate for him that he got put in a situation where he got outclassed. Next up, we have Zara Leonis, who I remember when this came out, I was so desperate for him to come back, and I thought he was a character totally willing to come back, right? This would have been great for the liberation of Lothal. His story just kind of stops after the Academy. He's never seen again just because of his value to like early rebels and like intrigue with the Imperials there. I put him ahead of Jai.
Zare was a really interesting character to start, and I do remember those Finn theories. The fact that he never comes back kind of sucks, but he is such a big character in season one, especially, that I feel like I would put him ahead of Jai. Okay, next is Ahsoka, the one you've probably all been waiting for. Ahsoka's a great character, always in everything. But here, especially in Rebels, we have some of the most defining moments of her life. I mentioned earlier with Darth Vader. The moment she duels Vader is peak Star Wars, the best moment in Rebels for me personally. And she's also great sprinkled throughout season two. However, Ahsoka doesn't have as much of a role in Rebels as you would think. For somebody who's so intrinsically tied to the Rebels characters, for somebody who has such a big impact on Rebels, she's not in season three, and she shows up at the very end of season four. She brings a lot of valuable insight, but I don't know if I could quite say she's an S tier character for Star Wars Rebels specifically.
As much as I loved the season two finale, she didn't really have many appearances outside of season two. Fulcrum was always just like a way to bring her back for season one, and it would have been fine with her being killed there. I think if there was a duel for her to die, that was the one. But it's also important, I think, for Filoni that she doesn't die to her master's monster. She dies peacefully now as a survivor. Because of that, I'm gonna put her behind Maul. I think Maul just has something very clear and direct. Lastly, we have Wedge Antilles, part of the Sky Strike Academy. It does come pretty late to the point that it's like he gets rescued, right? We get to bring some characters that are necessary for A New Hope, but they're with the Phoenix Cell, right? The Phoenix Squadron. I kind of hate to say it, but he's a C tier.
I agree. C tier. Wedge doesn't have too big of a role. He should have had a bigger role, especially with like the way he's introduced. He's in the trailer. They show you the stuff like, oh, it's Wedge Antilles, but we don't get enough of him, unfortunately. Well, that's gonna do it then for our tier list. Here's one last look at the whole thing here. So that's gonna wrap up our list. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't liked the video yet, make sure you do so. Check out our Patreon programs. Again, I said there are a lot of perks there that tie into the tier list format of shows. We know you guys all like that. If you would like to more directly participate in the way our tier lists are done, make sure you check out those perks on our Patreon and YouTube memberships. Stay tuned for our Ahsoka coverage. We do have Ahsoka coverage live every single Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific. This week we'll be talking about episode 6 and our predictions and speculation on Friday. So make sure you watch all of that great content. Thank you so much for watching this video, and we'll see you all next time.